Hello, Hopkinton. I'm Carol Kavanaugh, Superintendent of Schools, and I'm bringing you today another episode of Highlights from the Hill, the TV show that is all Hopkinton Public Schools all the time. And you'll notice that we are filming this at Hopkinton High School. This is our second episode that we're doing from the new studio at the high school, so we're excited to be doing that. With me today is our Director of Finance and Operations, Mrs. Susan Rothermick, and we are here to talk about all things FY24 budget, and that includes the operating budget as well as our capital budget. So, Susan, thank you for being here today.
Good morning. Thank you.
So let's start with, let's talk some capital, because I think that that is probably most interesting to our viewers. As everyone knows, our enrollment has increased markedly over the last 5 to 7 years. And we are now getting to the place where we have some major construction projects underway. We have obviously added lots of classrooms over the last couple of years, but I think now we are doing big things. So do you want to talk a little bit about the projects we have going?
Sure. So if you look at the enrollment and we look at our projections that go out to 2030, we're looking to be adding 1,200 students to the buildings that exist. As you can imagine, and I know you like to say, that's the equivalent of 2 schools.
Yes.
So over the years, we have added some classrooms. We've added 4 at Elmwood and Hopkins, and we've added 6 here at the high school. But as you can imagine, that still is not going to be sufficient to house another 1,200 students. So what we're looking at right now, we are in the process with the Mass School Building Authority, the MSBA, to look at a project for the Elmwood School, whether that is renovation, addition, or new construction totally. So this building has been submitted to the MSBA back since 2008, I believe. So it's been a long time coming for the Elmwood project. But then in addition, what we will be presenting to the school committee this Thursday actually is our 10-year capital plan. And within that will also be a potential for a building project at the Hopkins School, putting on another addition. As we know, the Hopkins School right now does not have sufficient space just even for those 2 grades.
Yes.
So that's something that will be introduced on Thursday. And then it continues because we do have space constraints at all of our buildings. We do have a campus study that is being done by the same designer that is working on the Elmwood project, Perkins Eastman. And they'll be looking at all our buildings, the enrollment in each of those buildings, and giving us an idea of where our space constraints are and projected magnitude, cost magnitude of what would need to be done in each building. So that will be good information for the community to plan for the future.
Sure, and we've had one public forum. There is another one on, actually this evening.
Tonight.
Yep. And there will be several going forward. So I hope that folks are kind of watching, social media and seeing the things that are sent out from the school district so that you know when those public forums are so that people can kind of tune into these projects. The Elmwood project, even though it feels like we've been doing this a very long time, we submitted the first statement of interest, I think, as you said, back in 2008. It was March of 2020, just as the pandemic hit, that you and I were submitting that final SOI to the MSBA that was accepted,
right.
Inviting us in to have the Elmwood project sort of, a partnership with the MSBA. And so even though it feels now like we've been at it for more than 2 years, because we have, how long is the duration of this? I mean, where do you see, imagining that everything goes successfully, when do we open our doors?
Right. So anytime you're in a project with the MSBA, it is a very prescribed timeline, if you will. So typically from the time that you are accepted in, which would have been March of 2020, you're looking at a minimum of 5 to 6 years. So if this continues along that correct path, the first day that we could open the doors to whatever the community decides for the Elmwood School would be 2026. So It is a long process, and we're a ways away, but there's a lot of planning, a lot of community input that would come into some of these decisions. And then, of course, there's the construction. So it does take a long time.
Sure, yeah. And the position that we're in right now, we are sort of in a place where we are examining all kinds of sites. And we're really looking also at the Elmwood site itself, which is one of the requirements of the MSBA.
Correct.
They require that we take a look at that site. What are your thoughts about all of the sites that we've been looking at? I mean, I know that the elementary school building committee has now whittled it down to 5, is that correct?
I believe when we first started looking at properties, we really cast a wide net and looked at any property, whether it was town-owned or privately owned, that was over 10 acres. And I believe we came up with 44 different properties that the building committee was evaluating. There were a lot of requirements, if you will, in terms of kind of whittling it down, some, wetlands, ledge, access to utilities, things like that. And so we did bring that 44 property look down to about 5. That's correct. So, and in that 5, there is a mix of both town and privately owned. We'll be reaching out to those properties that are privately owned to see if it's something that those owners would even consider.
Sure.
So that, of course, is another piece to evaluating everything that we're looking at.
Yeah, I think it's a great surprise to the community that there are 44 10-acre or greater parcels of land in Hopkinton, because it very often feels like, we're very built. But that's not really the case at all.
No.
And in terms of a price tag, I mean, I don't really recall how much we spent on Marathon. Maybe you do.
I believe it was around $60 million.
Yeah. And this will clearly be significantly more.
Correct.
One of the reasons I think that it'll be significantly more is we have obviously construction costs are significantly more than they were back then, but we also have the opportunity to create a 2-3-4 school.
Yes. So one of the things when we submitted to the MSBA, we submitted for both a 2-3 and a 2-3-4 potential. And looking at the 2-3-4 was really, again, that broader look of what can we do to relieve the pressure in K-12, all of our buildings. So if we're able to get the state to help us pay for that 3rd grade, so that we could have a 3-grade school, it does relieve pressure in terms of enrollment capacity in all of our buildings. So that's one of the things that we're looking for. And that will, of course, increase the cost because now you're looking at a 3-grade school as opposed to what we did for the Marathon school. But in addition, as everyone knows, costs of everything, supply chain issues, labor costs, everything has gone up so markedly that the cost to build this next school will be much higher than the Marathon school.
Sure. And what is the current reimbursement rate?
I think it's estimated to be around 30%.
Yeah. So, really that's pretty good when you think about all of the building needs we have. To have somebody pay 30% of the bill feels great.
Correct. Yeah. And again, it relieves pressure on the community to have the state pay for a significant portion of this building. If we need to do an additional loan, for instance, what we're looking at for the Hopkins School, that is 100% not reimbursed by the state. So that becomes 100% taxpayer piece. But we are just bulging at the sides and can no longer fit the students within that school.
So as people take a look at our capital plan, they will see 2 projects concurrently, the Elmwood School project and one at the Hopkins School.
Correct. Although the Elmwood School project probably will not come up for a vote until December, January. So December of 23, January of 24 would probably be the earliest that the community would see that to come up for a vote.
And we would expect a special town meeting at that time.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to have these 2 projects going concurrently. And it's also expensive to have these 2 projects going concurrently. But I think, as we said at the beginning of this segment, we really do need places to put children.
That's correct.
That's where we are right now.
Yeah, I mean, the focus is on the students, the focus is on their education, and so you really need to have the facility to give that high-quality education.
Sure. So let's talk about some of the other projects that we have going on, not necessarily building, but some of the things that we're thinking about in terms of traffic mitigation, in terms of athletic fields, because I think these are exciting times. There are so many good things happening.
Correct. So a couple of projects that will be coming up. One, again, is very simple in terms of enrollment. When the Marathon building was designed, it was designed for around 300 students, and now we're well over 500 students.
Yes.
But of course, the playground that was designed for the enrollment at that time was for that smaller population. So one of the projects that will be on the Capitol is an additional playground at the Marathon School so that all children have access to a playground during recess time and break time. And that's just driven by pure numbers. To give all those kids access. A grant has been submitted, an application to the Community Preservation Act, so we'll see how that goes as it winds its way through. Another exciting thing that we looked at was really all the athletic facilities for both the middle school and the high school, and looking and evaluating both the numbers of student athletes and the condition. So as we went through all the fields and really had those discussions with the administration, with the high school, with the middle school administration, and the athletic director, it really came down to both the track and field 3 as being the top priority for our next focus. Now, the track and this project actually has been on the 10-year capital plan for a number of years. The track surface has already been resurfaced. It is at the end of life. And the field 3 being a grass field, we really hold that to football games only. So in terms of access and giving student athletes an opportunity of where to practice, where to play games, changing that over to a turf field really helps the student population here and allows more students on that field. Redoing the track, increasing the number of lanes. Again, we have probably over 150 athletes that do both cross-country and spring track. That's a number of students that you try to spread out within that area. It is a no-cut sport, so it's very important to really give those kids that opportunity. The other piece to it, too, in terms of students attending games, there just are not enough seats. And I believe Mr. Bishop actually gives assigned seating to where kids can sit, and then, of course, the rest just have to sit on the ground. So all of those things would be an improvement, and that's something that will be on the capital plan as well. And a grant application has also been submitted for that for the Community Preservation Act funds. So again, we'll see how that winds its way through. The other tricky thing and not so exciting, of course, is just doing your air quality within schools and replacing end-of-life equipment.
Sure.
So that's a little on the boring side, but needs to be done.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about the bleachers. That is a concern that I share with Mr. Bishop. I feel like it becomes almost a safety concern.
Yeah.
You know, to have people who have to sit either in the grass or have to stand through the game, or, you know, that just doesn't seem equitable to me. So,
Correct. Agreed.
It feels like a very good project.
Right, yeah. It would be exciting for the students to have both the marathon, so you're looking at your littlest ones to get an additional playground, to, you know, your middle school and high school having access to facilities to, you know, do what they would like to do.
Yes,
Yeah.
agreed.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the operating budget now. We just received from the Select Board the budget message for the year, and we are sort of looking at that 5.1% that was mentioned at the meeting. we've talked a lot about the student numbers that have, come in so far, and I think we're somewhere around 150 students above where we imagined we would be at this time, based on both of our demographers. And so, what we like to do is we like to take those increments of 20. So I think we're, probably talking about 10 teachers already that we would need. And when I say teachers, I really mean full-time equivalents, right?
Right.
Whatever that looks like. But I feel like the numbers that are projected to come in through the end of the school year, are probably going to drive more personnel. And as you frequently remind me, personnel is about 80% of our budget.
Correct. Yeah, so when you look at our enrollment projections, we're already surpassing what was projected to be at the end of the school year. So that's a concern, and that's where you're looking at already, we're probably looking at 10 positions just to fulfill what has already come through the door. Now, when we do the budgeting, we use the more conservative projection, which is what's called cohort survival, meaning the students that are here just matriculate through. But there is probably a more aggressive enrollment projection, which is the new housing starts, which does show higher numbers. And that may be where we really need to start moving our budgeting towards, because we are going through and surpassing that cohort survival enrollment projections. So when you there are a couple things, however, because of the constraints within our building, where we may say we do need 10 teachers, we may not have a physical place to put them. So that's one of the tricky things that will come up as part of our budget discussions as well.
Sure. I think that has already started to happen at the Hopkins School. We've had many conversations, I think, with Mrs. Balello, who right now has some class sizes that are as high as 25. And we look at them and we say, would we want classroom sizes of 26 or 27, or are we going to need to start readjusting that space, which might mean dismantling an art room or in some way putting up some kind of partition to create classrooms in the library space, which is a really nice open space, and it's a beautiful classroom right now, but it may also need to be partitioned in some way so that we can get kids in there.
Right. And that's what we had to do with the Marathon School. We're putting that addition on, but that's what had happened, is we had taken over all those other spaces just for regular classrooms. And so as we need to add those 10 additional teachers, plus whatever we would need in 24, we may have to get creative with spaces within all our buildings.
Sure. And we can probably talk just a little bit, too, about special education out-of-district placement costs. Those are... At this point in time, we're getting information from the state that's telling us that those costs could go up 14%. Hopefully that won't be the case, but...
That's correct. So the direction that we have been given in terms for budgeting is a 14% increase in our out-of-district tuitions. Now, that's obviously a huge hurdle for us when the budget message from the town is an increase of 5%. And our out-of-district costs are projected to go up by 14%. So as you can imagine, that doesn't work. The math doesn't work. So we'll continue to march along and get as much information as possible, but that 14% increase still is holding in all the discussions that I've seen.
Sure. So we begin very soon all of our meetings with the building principals and each of the directors. And they're always very tricky because, I think when we look at our per pupil expenditure, we really do keep that in a very, I think, conservative place. And so sometimes our folks are asking for things, and we have to always ask them, is this in the need to have category or in the nice to have category? And so those meetings can be a little bit challenging.
Right, and you may see that a need in one building is higher than a need in another building. So that's where, the administrators really do work as a team and make sure that there's some give and take. But at the end of the day, the focus is on the students and what's best for kids. And it's that need to have for the education. as opposed to the nice to have.
Sure. And a lot of that need to have is dictated not only by enrollment, but we do see those bubbles that come into the district where we think, oh my gosh, there are a lot of kids in that graduating class. But I think also in, some of the student data. So if we see that the data tells us that, there might be, social emotional needs, or the data tells us that there might be increased mathematics instructional needs, that we really do put the money where the need is. And I think we do a nice job here with data.
Right. Yeah, examining the like you said, the data and the curriculum and what best suits the needs of the students at that time. Looking at the students that are in front of us, but also kind of keeping an eye to the future if we're starting to see a trend.
Sure.
Yeah.
So how are things on the food service and transportation fronts?
These are always tricky. Food service, I believe the biggest issue we have are the lines. The good news about that is that means that the students are eating. It's always better from an education standpoint if kids are well fed and have a healthy meal. It helps them to get through the day. So what we're trying to do really is working on those lines. But it's tricky to make sure that our kitchens are fully staffed at all times.
Sure.
And that's really what helps to move it along so kids have sufficient time to eat. From a transportation standpoint, it is good to see that our buses are actually full. And it does really seem that the traffic on Hayden Row, probably in this year, is the best that I've seen it in terms of traffic movement. And that's great to see, whether it's parents putting more kids on the bus. Don't really know exactly what that answer is, but that has been good to see, that Hayden Row is really moving along. It's been tricky with the construction, the downtown construction, because things do change almost daily in terms of where they're working, where there's a truck in the way. But our buses really have been running on time, and kids are getting to school on time. And that's really what's very important, so that they have sufficient time to get here, get to their class, and feel relaxed, not rushed.
Yes, and I think, I'm not sure that parents quite understand that whole notion of queuing. I think that one of the things that really helps the traffic on Hayden Row is if you're able to queue several buses and, really scores of cars on the school property as opposed to on the road.
Right.
And so I think we have resolved those issues. Drop off and pick up at Marathon feels very smooth, and we're not seeing backup on Hayden Row. And I think the same is true for the middle school, and Hopkins has really never had a problem because they have an entire loop road on which they can put lots of cars and lots of buses. So really, I think a lot of our capital planning has to do with mitigating traffic here. And then, of course, Elmwood is in such an interesting space because Elm Street is used frequently as a cutoff between 495 and 135. So, over there, and given the configuration, too, of the driveway, which is also a parking lot, it's hard to get the traffic off the road over there.
Right. I think the big thing is, whenever you do a school or build a school or design a school, is that separation of car and bus traffic, but also having an adequate driveway so that cars can get off the main road and safely get their students out. Now, if you look at the driveway from Hayden Row to the door of the high school, it's way too short for the number of students that are here, so linear footage does not give us a tremendous amount of space for cars. So we do try to queue them around what was the old bus loop and on that straightaway to try to pull as much off of the road. We are also still looking at another way to design the front, if you will, possibly moving the tennis courts down by the turf field that exists now, so that we can create more parking and also a different entrance and exit strategy that would create that longer line to really get cars again safely off the road.
Sure.
Yeah.
And if you think about this building, the high school building, it was really built for far fewer students than what we have today.
Correct.
We're up to 1,200 students in this building, and
Right.
that's a lot of kids, given that the infrastructure was probably something more like an 800-student school, when we were thinking about it
Right.
way back.
And even this morning, as both of us kind of joked when we came to be here, there is nowhere to park. So both of us are on the grass, although I think Mr. Kavanaugh's in the middle of the road.
Yeah.
So these are the things that we do really need to alleviate.
Yes, I saw your car. My parking is more deplorable than yours. Full disclosure. But speaking of getting the tennis courts out back, that would be nice. I mean, I think it gives you a real, beautiful athletic campus feel, if you had that. And to regain that parking room up front, or even to reestablish parking, directives out front would be really nice.
Yeah, and just to further clarify, that is something that you'll see in a future capital request, is taking field 7 and 8, putting the tennis courts back there. The nice thing about that is it really gives those student athletes a chance to be part of that whole campus athletic facility that is in the back. But in addition, we would be adding parking. People that come to watch anything that happens on the turf field now typically line their cars along the loop road. And it's not a great situation. So this would give them an actual parking space next to the tennis courts, so they'd have access to watch their students in any of those fields that are nearby. So it would do two things, well, do a couple things. Then where the tennis courts are located now would become additional parking for this campus. Also, again, the potential to change your exit and entrance strategy, potentially put it out to where the traffic light is, making it easier for cars to get in and out, but also it gives us that additional parking in the front as well.
Sure.
So you and I don't park on the grass.
All right. Well, I'm sure there are 100 more things that we could say about capital planning and the operating budget and all of that. And these really are exciting times with so many new things happening. And I mean, really, the enrollment is just driving great change. So
It is.
thank you for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you for having me.
But yeah, it was a pleasure, really. And thank you for tuning in at home. And I hope to see you very soon on another episode of Highlights from the Hill.